Hello, it's me, Christine. Welcome to my little crime corner. We find ourselves in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania today to meet the Boskowski family. Tim Boczkowski had just moved here with his 3 children, Randy, Sandy, and Todd, after his wife Elaine had tragically passed away due to an accidental drowning. Tim also lost his business in North Carolina, so the family was hoping to get a fresh start. Things soon began looking up when Tim started his new business where he made crowns and bridges for local dentists. Things started looking up in his love life as well when he met a woman named Marianne at church at a Catholic singles night. Marianne Fullerton was a 32-year-old Pittsburgh native who had gone to the singles night on a whim and was very glad she did. After the church's singles night, Marianne had come home and excitedly told her family that she had just met the most wonderful man. Marianne was in love, and she had told all of her friends that he was the one. Her friends had agreed that this was the happiest that they had seen her, and they were excited for her, as they had expected the impending wedding. In addition to being madly in love with Tim, Marianne was such a loving person. She fell in love with Tim's 3 kids, and Tim's children loved Marianne as well. They didn't have their mother, and each of the children really seemed to have a connection with Marianne, and she was able to fill a hole in their heart. No one, of course, can replace a parent, but she was there for them physically and emotionally, and it meant a lot. In fact, on June 12th of 1993, when Tim and Marianne eventually had gotten married, they had decided to include all of the children in the ceremony. It was a very touching moment, and everyone cried. They had a great marriage and a wonderful family life, and Marianne and Tim were just so happy to have found each other. They felt as though their lives were complete. On the night of Monday, November 7th, 1994, at around 11 p.m., after the kids went to bed, Tim and Marianne went to their backyard hot tub. Being November, it was pretty cold that night, somewhere in the mid-30s, and the hot tub's water temperature was 104 degrees. Nice and toasty. After a little while in the hot tub, Tim had gotten out and went inside the house to take a shower, and when he returned, just a little after midnight, he found Marianne floating in the hot tub. When he went over to pull her out, he found that she was unconscious. Tim frantically called 911 and had told the operator that she wasn't breathing. While on the phone, he had struggled to pull Marianne from the water, and the operator heard him and asked if he was able to pull Marianne out of the water, and Tim had said no. The dispatcher then said that the ambulance was on their way and to continue trying to pull her from the water. He did eventually pull Marianne from the water and laid her down on the ground. Once the ambulance had arrived, they had rushed Marianne to the hospital's trauma center, but it was unfortunately too late. Once there, she was pronounced dead. Tim had told the police that he and Marianne had gotten into the hot tub at around 11 p.m. and stayed there for about an hour. He also said that they had been drinking the whole time. He said he had a few beers and Marianne had somewhere between 13 and 15 beers. This seems like an excessive amount to drink in an hour, especially for someone of Marianne's petite size. Tim said that he had gotten out first and had gone inside to take a shower, but Marianne had decided that she wanted to stay outside in the hot tub for just a little while longer. After Tim's shower, he said he had gone back outside to rejoin Marianne just about 20 minutes later. It was then that he had discovered Marianne floating face down, unresponsive. Investigators thought because of the hot water in conjunction with the cold air temperatures outside, Marianne might have attempted to get out of the hot tub on her own, but possibly got lightheaded and slipped, hitting her head and rendering her unconscious, resulting in her drowning. During her autopsy, the medical examiner had found that Marianne's blood alcohol level was 0.22%, which is more than twice the legal limit of intoxication. Tim did say she had been drinking heavily after all, so to find this out wasn't much of a surprise. Although this is definitely an excessive amount, according to Tim, not so much for Marianne. Apparently, she did have a history of heavy drinking and had been pulled over and arrested for drinking and driving and had 2 DUIs on her record. Some of Marianne's friends had expressed their concern over Marianne's drinking in the past, but she had been able to convince them that it really wasn't anything to worry about, and it was far from being out of control. Marianne's untimely and shocking death left Tim once again without a wife, and Randy, Sandy, and Todd once again without a mother. The investigators that had been assigned to the case had felt that something was not quite right. On all accounts, this had appeared to be an accident, but they had reason to be suspicious based on what they found at the scene. The first thing they noticed was the little floating thermometer stick that was supposed to be harnessed to the upper edge of the hot tub had come loose, and they found it floating at the bottom of the hot tub. This might indicate that Tim and Marianne didn't know how hot the water's temperature had actually reached, and it had gotten to an unsafe temperature. After a while in water of any temperature, except of course exceptionally cold water, your body sort of acclimates and you become temperature blind, in the sense that the water might be really, really hot, but because your body has become used to it, you might not notice if it is scalding, even though it is. Same with cold. Have you ever jumped into a really cold pool before, and after swimming around in it for a while, you get used to it, and it doesn't really seem that cold anymore? Same phenomenon. In addition to this, investigators also found on the deck a soaking wet pack of cigarettes and an ashtray, 2 plastic cups, and a box that looked like it housed a breathing device and a mouthpiece, which they did find on the side of the hot tub and was confirmed to be what Tim had used on Marianne to perform CPR. Police did find it odd that Tim would use this device on his wife, since the purpose of this breathing device was to put a barrier between your mouth and someone else's, in the event that you're performing CPR on a stranger. Did he not kiss his wife? Why would he use this on her? Anyway, it was also noted to be suspicious that Tim would have left Mary Ann alone for several minutes while he would have gone inside to retrieve this mouthpiece barrier. While police were interviewing Tim, they noticed a 1.5-inch scratch on the right side of his neck. They then asked Tim to take off his shirt, and they found that there were several fresh scratches all over him on his waist, hands, and shoulders. After Mary Ann's death, her family had discovered that Tim's first wife had died, and when they found out how, they were shocked. Several months earlier, Mary Ann's aunt had asked a question in passing. When her aunt asked how his first wife had died, Mary Ann said, "Oh, she had choked on something while in the bathtub and she drowned." When prompted further, Mary Ann was like, "Ugh, Tim doesn't like to talk about it. It makes him too upset." Investigators discovered that 4 years earlier, Tim told local police that Elaine had been intoxicated after returning home from a church function. As Tim was getting ready for bed, he said that Elaine had decided that she wanted to take a bath. He didn't see any reason to stay up at that point, and he said he had fallen asleep. His daughter Sandy, who was 6 years old at the time, said she was woken up in the middle of the night by a very loud thump coming from the master bathroom. Sandy then ran to her dad's room and shook him awake. She said she had heard a loud noise coming from the bathroom, so the two of them went to investigate. The bathroom door was locked, and after knocking several times and hearing no response, he then got a screwdriver and forced the door open. Once inside, he found Elaine face down in the water. Tim told police that he had pulled her out and rested her over the tub's sliding doors tracks and pressed into her back to release any water that he assumed she might have swallowed. He thought that there was something possibly blocking her breathing passage, or that she had something that was lodged in her throat that he would be able to knock loose. After several minutes with no success, he then called 911 and paramedics took Elaine to the hospital, where she was tragically pronounced dead. When police later came to investigate the scene, they found there was vomit in the drained bathtub, evidence that Tim had attempted to resuscitate Elaine. Something that they did find odd, though, was that the floor and the whole side of the tub was completely dry. Tim was also completely dry. Of course, he could have changed, so that's really not all that surprising or suspicious. However, even if you dry the floors, the shower door tracks were completely dry. This was where Tim had laid Elaine to resuscitate her. He had pulled her from the water-filled tub and placed her over the racks. It makes no sense why this area would be dry. Also, keep in mind, these are probably max 1-inch tracks. No one would make the effort to dry this area. It should have been wet. A rookie police officer named Brenda Vance was troubled by this whole situation and felt that something might have been overlooked. She was the same size as Elaine So, on her own, she decided to see if she could submerge herself underwater to the point where Elaine was and see if she could keep herself submerged. As soon as there was enough water in the tub to cover Brenda's face, the tub was full and began overflowing, and the tub's automatic drain valve began to let out water. Even as she was able to submerge her head underwater, the water was too shallow to remain under, and her head began bobbing up. She had to make an effort to actively keep her head underwater. There was no chance Elaine would have been able to stay underwater if she was unconscious. She would have floated on the surface. Upon evaluation of Elaine's autopsy report, the medical examiner had indicated that there was no water in her airways, meaning that her cause of death would not have necessarily been drowning. It could have been something else. Since the presence of water in the lungs is not always a definitive indicator of drowning, the coroner noticed that Elaine had 3 lines across her chest that were consistent with the shower door tracks. Tim's explanation was that he had put Elaine over the tub side and over the tracks and had tried to push water out, and this was a reasonable enough explanation, and the medical examiner found this to be plausible, as the marks were consistent with that. Elaine's blood alcohol level was 0, which contradicted what Tim had said. Remember, he said that she had come home intoxicated after her church function prior to getting in the bathtub. As suspicious as this inconsistency was, the coroner ruled Elaine's death undetermined. This is such a tragedy to happen once, let alone be experienced twice by the same person. Both Elaine and Marianne's friends and family felt this to be too much of a coincidence, and they also thought that both women looked pretty similar to each other. They had similar curly hair, wore extremely thick glasses, and were both very much involved with their church. Tim definitely had a type. Because Elaine's death had been ruled undetermined, investigators were hoping that Marianne's autopsy would have yielded more conclusive results. In total, Marianne had 53 internal and external bruises, mostly concentrated in her shoulders, back, and neck. The bruising on her neck and arms was small and spotty and resembled fingerprints. There was evidence that blood flow at one point was not able to reach her brain, and she suffered a lack of oxygen. The coroner believes that Marianne did not drown. He believed that she had been strangled by Tim, and he had possibly held her underwater until she was dead. It is thought that Marianne would not have been able to defend herself due to her being so intoxicated at the time. Her official cause of death was asphyxiation due to compression on the neck. It might be easy to get away with something once. Either you get lucky or the circumstances aren't questioned. Getting away with almost the same crime twice within such a short period, not as easy. You would have to be absolutely sure of yourself, because at some point, people are going to start to ask questions. Did Tim kill Marianne? From the outside, they had such a great relationship, and the kids loved her. However, after interviewing Marianne's friends and family, it was revealed that the couple had just gotten back from a cruise, and the vacation wasn't so smooth sailing. They had apparently gotten into a fight, and Marianne had said, "If things don't get better by the time we get back, I can always leave, and I'm taking the children with me." After hearing this, investigators were like, wow, that's a strong motive. Tim would definitely not allow his kids to be taken away easily. Interestingly enough, it was also brought to their attention that Elaine was planning on divorcing Tim just shortly before her death. Because Elaine had no life insurance, it was easier to say this was an accidental drowning, since there would be no money to serve as motive. This was not the case for Marianne. It was discovered that Tim had purchased a $100,000 life insurance policy for Marianne almost immediately after they got married. Tim Boczkowski was arrested and charged with first-degree murder in the deaths of both Elaine and Marianne. Tim had adamantly claimed that he was innocent, but the prosecution had shown evidence that did not support his claim. During the trial, it was suggested that Tim had followed Elaine into the bathroom, and before she was able to get to the tub, Tim grabbed her and held her over the edge of the tub, forcing her head underwater, and held her there for as long as 5 minutes until she had been rendered unconscious. There was a struggle and evidence that the vomit that investigators later found in the tub had come from Elaine fighting for her life, as opposed to Tim attempting to resuscitate her. The lack of water around the bathroom and the suspicious bruising on Elaine's body pointed to a brutal attack. It was also revealed that during an interview with one of the children, they had described an argument taking place earlier that night. While discussing Marianne's death, prosecutors believe that Tim and Marianne were in the hot tub arguing, possibly about Marianne's drinking, or the fact that Marianne wanted more children and Tim did not. It is believed that Tim had a moment to catch Marianne by surprise and overpower her, holding her head underwater. There was a struggle, which we know due to the soaked deck. It was evident that Marianne fought hard for her life, as indicated by the scratches on Tim's back. Because he had remembered that Elaine had vomited during her strangulation, it is believed that this is why Tim had used the mouthpiece on Marianne. Tim's defense argued that he had no reason to kill his wife. They had a happy marriage and nothing but a few minor arguments here and there. He didn't need money because his business was doing very well. It was also brought up that both of Tim's wives had a pre-existing heart condition, which caused their accidental deaths. Through everything I read, I was unable to find any proof or any medical evidence confirming this. The jury did not buy this, and they found Tim guilty of first-degree murder of his first wife Elaine, and for this, he was sentenced to life in prison. Tim was then found guilty of first-degree murder of his second wife Marianne, but this time the jury had sentenced him to death. Throughout all of this, Tim's children, Randy, Sandy, and Todd, stood by their father and believed he was innocent. They felt that their father had not gotten a fair trial since there were widespread reports for both Elaine and Marianne's death, and that the members of the jury had already formed their opinions before the trial had even begun. Although initially defending his father, his son Todd went through formal law enforcement training and began to suspect that his father was guilty. He noticed that things were not adding up, and the fact that Elaine and Marianne had died in such similar ways, in addition to both autopsy reports showing signs of strangulation, was just too much to refute. Todd believes that just a year and a half into their marriage, Marianne began noticing things about Tim that were not that great and might have been about to reveal them. She had apparently reached out to one of her friends, who just so happened to be Tim's sister. She had wanted to talk about something, but she never got the chance, as Marianne was killed later that week. In 2004, Tim's death sentence was lifted, and instead he was given a second life sentence. Tim initially served time in North Carolina until he was transferred in 2018 and is currently serving one of his life sentences at the State Correctional Institution in Greene, Pennsylvania. This was such a sad and awful case and really hurt everybody involved. Don't be afraid to speak up to your friends and family if you feel something is not right in your relationship, or you're noticing something like a lot of red flags, or if you're afraid. Someone will be there to help. Just always have your radars up and look out for each other. And with that, that is all I have for you today. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you learned something, and I will see you in the next one. Bye. It is 5:15 in the morning, and there's already competing lawnmowers here and here.